When I was young, I became an atheist. And like many a young atheist, I lived in a world of contradictions. For instance, I maintained that God did not exist, but was very angry with him for not existing. And then over the years, I began to challenge my atheistic philosophy. I became disillusioned with it. And by the time I had reached the age of 31, I had not only abandoned it, I had come to see it as an utterly vacuous doctrine. Not that I was yet ready to accept Christianity, much less the concept of a perfect being sacrificing himself for a mass of imperfect beings. But I had, rather reluctantly, come to the conclusion that some sort of God was the least objectionable theory, but not a God who was personal. I believed you could no more meet God than Hamlet could meet Shakespeare. And then one day I invited Professor Tolkien and another man called Hugo Dyson to dine with me at my college at Magdalen, when I used to tutor there. And after we had dined, we took a walk in the Magdalen grounds. And at this juncture, I ought to point out that Professor Tolkien and Hugo are very sincere Christians. And our conversation ranged over a wide array of subjects, finally settling on religion. And it was then that I happened to remark that I thought the story of Christ was nothing more than a myth. Well, that set Tolkien off. Jack, he said, in a way I have some sympathy with your remark. As you know, I believe all mythology contains some element of eternal truth. But the story of Christ is fundamentally different. You see, the author of that myth was God himself. The myth actually took place at a precise point in human history, and the whole of the myth is absolute truth. I said, what, even the dying and rising bit? He said, of course. I said, well, Tollers, that's what I used to call him, Tollers. Tollers, I said, that's very hard to swallow. Jackie said, you amaze me. If you meet the idea of a dying God in pagan literature, you don't mind it at all. You only object to it when you meet it in the Gospels. Well, he was right. Well, by the time they left me, it was 4 a.m. in the morning. But when I put my head on the pillow that night, I was beginning to see one thing very clearly indeed. You see, I had come to accept that God was God primarily by a series of logical steps. I realized that if I was going to accept that Christ was God, it would not be by an act of logic, but by an act of faith. Now, the very next day, Warnie is my brother, Warnie and I had planned a trip to Whipsnade Zoo. We were going in Warnie's motorbike and sidecar. And what happened during that morning is very hard to put into words, so I will simply say this. When I got into that sidecar, I did not believe that Christ was God. When I got out an hour and a half later at Whipsnade Zoo, I did. I had come to see that God became man for no other reason than to secure man's salvation. That the story of Christianity is primarily the story of that one grand miracle, that he who is beyond space and time, who is uncreated, who is eternal, came into nature, came into human nature, descended into his own universe, and there enacted what can and must be talked about. And now that I had come to see that that's what I wanted to do, to talk about it, and to be a light with his help in my little corner of the world.